I can't get in the internet right now, but hopefully we'll get it straightened out eventually. So let me go and talk a little bit first. I put a thing on Piazza where you could put your questions that you hopefully have. So the topic of today is to deal with input-output, really mostly input. And there's a new homework out that I hope you've already had a look at. It's not necessarily a hard homework, but if you don't approach it the right way, I think it can be pretty frustrating. So definitely give it the time that it deserves and think through it. So text.io. So text.io is simple. Mostly you use PrintWriter for output and Scanner for input. And these are, of course, classes that you've been using for a whole semester. Well, you haven't quite used PrintWriter. You've used system.out, but system.out can be hooked up to a file, and then it works the same way that you've already used it. So you make a new PrintWriter by saying new PrintWriter like this, and then it just saves all of your output in this file. You make a new scanner that reads from a file by this mumbo jumbo. And what I didn't put in the book, but what I want you to do for sure in the homework is whenever you construct a new scanner or a new PrintWriter, I forgot to put it out here, you want to say how you want to have your characters encoded. And I could give you a long lecture on what character encodings mean, but the shortcut is you always want to use UTF-8. There is, in this day and age, no reason to encode a file in anything other than UTF-8. And that is very natural on Linux, where that's the default encoding. On Windows, on the other hand, you have to work a little bit to get your text editor to save things in UTF-8. And so do you have to do so on the Mac, because they both use some legacy encodings that really should have gone away some time ago. So read up on that on your own a little bit if you have any questions about it. But in this course, you should assume that everything is encoded as UTF-8. It only matters for those files that contain non-ASCII characters, so any kind of special characters, things with accents, for example, that end with a squiggle that was in the input of one of the homeworks. But in this day and age, just about every file you're ever going to run into is going to have some of these funny characters, and so you should be prepared for that. All right. Unfortunately, maybe not. I mean, any time that you open a file either for reading or for writing, it's possible that your code can throw an exception. So it'll throw a file not found exception whenever it can't find the file that was specified in here. So the way it works is you can perfectly well make a new file object. So that the file class is somewhat misnamed. It really is just the name of a file that's encapsulated. It's not the actual file. So when you say new file, it doesn't yet throw an exception even if the file doesn't exist. But if you pass it to a PrintWriter or a scanner, and if it can't do the opening, maybe because the file name was wrong, had bad characters in it, or it referred to a non-existing subdirectory, then an exception will get thrown, and your program will terminate with that. Now, as we'll see on another slide, that exception has a bit of a twist that you have to declare it, but let me defer that. So now, when you read input, you have 4 choices, really. So you can read a number at a time by using next int, next double. You've been doing that for ages. You can read a whole line by calling next line. You can read a word at a time with next, or you can use a character at a time, which is pretty rare, but you can do it. And in fact, one of the 3 assignments is making you read a character at a time, just that you get a feel for what's involved with that. So in general, you kind of want to eyeball your input and say, is it line-oriented? Are lines meaningful in the input? So if we look at the homework assignments, for the first homework assignment with those president's salaries, lines are definitely meaningful because every line is a separate record. And words are not, because they have different numbers of words on them. So you definitely want to read in a line at a time. For the next one with the quizzes, lines are still what you need to go by, because it says if a line starts with an A in the parentheses, B in the parentheses, and so on, then that means something special. So if you were to read that thing in some other way, you might you wouldn't know where the line starts. So in both of those, you would want to read things in a line at a time. And really, lots and lots of input formats are line-oriented, and that's just the way that you would do it. Now, if everything that you read in is line-oriented, you kind of have a happy life. You just call next line, next line, next line, and things are good. But once in a while, you get an input where sometimes you want to read a number, and other times you want to read a whole line. So here I have an example. This input file here contains these ID numbers, and I want to read those with next int because they're numbers, so I want to get them out as integers. And then it contains here a line with a name, and actually I should have chosen a better example where maybe one of those names has a space in it, like Mary Lou, Mary space Lou. So I want to read those things in as next line. And every time that you mix next int or next double with next line, you have a bit of an awkward problem. And to see that problem, imagine that you're reading in now the first two lines here. So we're calling next int, and that reads off, oops, I can't highlight here. That reads off the 1729. What about the new line? When you call next int, does it consume the new line or does it leave it in place? Yeah, it leaves in place. There was a discussion about that on Piazza where people complained, and I guess rightly so, that the textbook was a little bit unclear about that. And so the way that next int works is it reads any white space that it finds, and then it reads the next word, and then it stops. So it doesn't read anything after the next word. And then it finally decides whether the word was actually an integer, and if so, it converts it, and if not, it throws an exception. So that's how next int works. So it does not actually consume the white space that comes after. It tries to be conservative about it, just in case someone else might want to have a look at that white space and figure out what to do with it. So now let's say we call it next int. So if I were to now call next line right away, here's what next line would do. It would say, well, I'm supposed to read up everything until I find a new line. So it goes in here, and it reads, and it finds a new line, and then it says, hey, I just found you a blank line. And that's what it really will do. So the remedy is that you make an extra call to next line in this situation. So you just need to remember, whenever you mix next int with next line, that you need to be aware of this problem. And after the call, when you switch from next int to next line, you need to consume that new line. It's really easy to remember this too, because this will happen to you when you forget, and you'll immediately go like this and say, oh yeah, that's that mistake again. It's one of those things that just happens. All right, so now we have a clicker question. Now let's see if I can get back on the network. Give me a minute here. Oh, you know what I'm going to do is, Snicker, can I use your computer? Host pro, lecture 5, clicker 1, clicker, choices A, B, okay. Okay. Let's see what I can do here.